The Institute for Faith and Freedom at Grove City College presents Liberty Mail with the Student Fellows of Faith and Freedom.
Welcome back to Liberty Mail. This is Libby Krieger.
And Margot Weller.
And we're coming to you from the underground studio here at Grove City College, put on by the Institute for Faith and Freedom. Just a little reminder that on April 7th, we're having keynote speaker Michael Knowles come and speak at our conference. So if you're not signed up for that already, make sure you go to our website, faithandfreedom.com. You'll see his head big there on the screen. Click it and then sign up, because we are allowing students, outside guests, and conference attendees to come to that keynote.
Fast.
Yes, it is filling up very fast. So get your tickets as soon as possible. We're really looking forward to that. He's a huge draw on conservative movement. So we're really looking forward to that. Just to jump into our wins this week, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis recognized Sarasota native Emma Wyatt as the fastest woman competitor in the NCAA championship. So that was against the Leah Thomas transgenderism kind of topic, where Leah Thomas, I'll just say Leah, won the race. And so then the second place winner, Emma Wyatt, was recognized by Florida as the real first place winner because she's actually a woman. And I think that's a win because it's kind of pushing back against this transgender ideology and narrative that we're seeing in the mainstream left and just mainstream political, that we should accept Leah Thomas as the first place winner, even though Leah has a biological advantage being a man.
Right. It almost is like this is the last frontier of truth. The whole pronouns, but then the transgender thing to a whole nother level is if we're not willing to define what a woman is. And the Supreme Court nominee couldn't define what a woman is because she wasn't a biologist. It was her excuse. And this is just a perfect example of the truth is very evident in these sorts of things. And even though there's so much pressure to not actually speak it, it's great that Ron DeSantis is actually digging his heels in on this, because this topic really is the last frontier of reality.
Yeah, and I think conservatives have in some ways brought on how you mentioned the Supreme Court nominee said, I can't define a woman, I'm not a biologist, reducing man and woman to simply biological terms, because we use that as an argument. We're like, biological man, biological woman. No, we don't need the qualifier biological in there. It's just man and just woman.
Right.
And that should be enough.
Totally agreed. And that is something that I feel like I've been guilty of saying in sorts of discussions like this, just because that has become the jargon, and realizing acting as if there has to be sort of a differentiation between a biological man and a non-biological man. That's what saying biological would imply, is playing into the narrative and giving into the lies that those things are separate, instead of just there is a man and there is a woman. And that really should be the end of the conversation. It really doesn't need to be that difficult.
Yeah, exactly. By saying biological, we're inherently implying there's something other than a biological man.
Right.
So whether that may be a mental man, and it's playing into that narrative, just like you said. And so I think it's really a great thing that we're seeing Ron DeSantis do this. A lot of really strong movements from him in the past couple months. So I have a statement from his press secretary. It says, not only is it unfair for males to compete in women's sports, but it is ridiculous for the NCAA to deny material reality and demand that all Americans play along with their charade. And I think that's really great that they're not even going with the biological narrative there. They're just saying it's unfair for males to compete in women's sports.
Right.
And it's so interesting, because if a woman was taking some sort of steroids and they found that out, that would probably not be allowed, right? But then a man who has this advantage from the testosterone and just the hormones that are naturally in men, make them more muscular, more fit, can swim faster, that's allowed, just because we're allowing this delusion to become mainstream.
Right. And I think what's the biggest win in all of this, besides just DeSantis being able to make this claim, is that I have seen on social media, I've only seen one person that I follow posting something in favor of Leah Thomas and in favor of transgender women. It was like, supporting all women means supporting trans women. I just really wanted to ask, okay, then what is a woman? But besides, I think it's really gotten the attention of a lot of moderates and just a lot of people who want to believe in truth and common sense. And it's really unfortunate that it's taken a situation like this to get people's attention. But here we are, and if this is what it took, then good. But I think that this situation is really bringing to light the insanity that's been going on in the transgender movement. And so I think this has been beneficial for conservatives, showing these are the endpoints that we've been warning you about, of the problems that come from this sort of ideology.
From the radicalism. This is the natural progression. And if you want this, have to it. But I don't think most people want that. And
No.
even looking at it in, like, for the feminists, we talk about how this is unfair to the women. And it's interesting. Michael Knowles was saying how conservatives are now being like, oh, women's sports, blah, 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 like feminism, like this is unfair to women, which it is, and that's
Absolutely.
true. But it's almost like, how many people really, really care about women's sports? Like,
Yeah,
how many
it's
people
almost
are vying?
it's almost a masquerade of the conservatives to try to play on the emotions of the feminists and people who do really care about women's sports. But at the end of the day, the heart of our stance on this is the truth, the reality, not necessarily some sort of charitable cause towards
Yeah.
a passion for women's sports.
Yeah. Well, also imagine being that fourth place winner.
I know. Yeah.
You could have had that. You could have been on the stand with the bronze medal, but
Right.
no, a man beat you out.
Yeah.
And it's saying men are even better women than women can be.
Right.
Like, that's all around. There's so many angles you can take this from, but again, huge win that we're seeing. One of the most conservative governors in America, or one of the most who is outspoken currently, standing up for this and not even being apologetic about it. So I
Right.
think that's a huge win in
I
itself.
totally agree. This is not something that deserves any sort of apology, to believe that a man is a man and a woman's a woman and that they're different.
Exactly. You said it well. So moving on to our second win of the week, we're seeing a poll. This is an article from The Hill. Nearly 2 in 3 voters, including broad majorities across racial and educational and economic lines, believe public schools are moving in the wrong direction. So I don't think this is like a decisive win. I just think it's an interesting, thought-provoking topic to look at. I mean, we're seeing this, I think, as a result of stuff happening in Virginia, Loudoun County, and all across. It's been a nationalized issue. This critical race theory drawing attention to what our children are being taught in schools. And so seeing that all Americans, whether they are black or white, Democrat or Republican, are a little bit concerned about what their kids are being taught in school, I think is a win in itself, because it's drawing more attention to that. And also, because it's such a foundational issue for the future of America, because what you're taught at such a young age inherently impacts what you believe the rest of your life. And
Absolutely.
if you're taught blue is green from a young age, you're going to believe that for the rest of your life.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree. That definitely is a win. And I saw Allie B. Stuckey post something the last few days that it essentially said that children are always the victims of leftist experiments. And I thought that was such a great, concise way to explain that children really are the victims of so much of the radical leftist ideology. And that's why, like, we do need parents to be aware of the things that are happening. And while there's so much nonsense during COVID, it was a great thing that parents were starting to be able to see what was actually being taught to their kids, because that was a lot of what started this sort of concern, is that parents had no idea. They were sending their kids to school for 8 hours, assuming that they were getting taught math, but actually they were getting taught critical race theory, gay pride parades, something. And I saw that in Texas the other day, actually. But yeah, I totally agree with you that that's definitely a win. And I'm in Marxism class with Dr. Kengor right now.
Only the best.
Yeah, truly the best. Big fans of Dr. Kengor, of course. But a lot that I have realized that I didn't fully understand about communism and Marxist ideologies is that there is so much of an emphasis on separating children from parents and essentially allowing the state to be who's raising your kids. And that is one of the end goals of a communist and Marxist ideology. And we're seeing almost some of that of, like, let's start childcare, like guaranteed childcare from the government as young as possible, and let's separate kids from the parents, and let's push radical agendas through public school. And that was something that I didn't realize was so ingrained and integral into the Marxist ideology until going through this class with Dr. Kengor and like reading the manifesto, and it makes it very explicit that that's a goal. And I think it's really important to be aware of that when making decisions for your children's schooling.
Well, I think that's a great point you touched on, because I think the Marxists understand that education is inherently indoctrination. So whoever has control over what the children are being taught has control over the rest of society, really, because that's, again, impacting what they're going to believe, what they're going to strive for, and the worldview in which they view everything for the rest of their lives. And they'll be the next leaders ruling the country. So I think it's very important, and that's why it does matter what our kids are being taught in school, because that is inherently indoctrinating them to believe a certain way. And there is truth you can teach. So if you believe, or if you teach truth, you'll be having them use truth as a worldview. But if you teach them to hate their country and believe that gender is only merely a social construct, they're going to pursue that worldview in the rest of their pursuits.
Right. And I do think that that's something that liberals get right, that progressives get right, is that they do understand the importance of education. I think that's a lot of why leftists have completely infiltrated higher education, even public school. That's become kind of just a woke area that everyone's accepted. And
they've infiltrated the institutions.
Yeah, exactly. And they really understand the power of education, just like you said. I have a friend who, I won't say the name of her college to maintain her confidentiality because she's an extremely closeted conservative at this school, but she is in grad school for social work somewhere, and she is the only conservative in the entire program. No one knows she's a conservative. They make jokes about conservatives, whatever. She thinks that she would basically be hung at this on a stake if they knew. But she told me that one of the people in her class said, I should really be a professor. I'm so good at radicalizing the
youth.
people. And
my goodness.
That, I think, really was a very telling sign of how people view education, that it's a way to radicalize people and that that's a noble pursuit. So that was really something that stuck out to her.
Obviously, first, that's so concerning.
Yeah.
But second, you can see the left understands.
They
fight well because they understand the reality of the situation in the way that conservatives, or many conservatives / libertarians, are just hands off,
Right.
the free market's going to fix it all. And that is not what we're seeing here. And so if we don't take in stride what we've seen in reality, I think we're going to be at a loss in a few years. We're going to see the impact of that.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I do like the free market more than you, Libby. But,
I know.
That's another podcast.
I'd love to talk to Michael Knowles about that. So maybe whenever he comes, I'll have to pick his brain on that, because I feel like he has a pretty strong stance on education being indoctrination. So therefore, we should ban critical race theory. Maybe not banning books per se, but banning a specific ideology that is dangerous to our children and our country. I think there's different ways to go about doing that, but definitely interesting. And another point that this article mentioned is that parents more broadly are okay with the way schools are teaching all races to be respected. What they don't trust is the teaching of racism. So the difference there, I think, shows that they're not concerned about white supremacy or anything like that. They're concerned more about the critical race theory side of it, where racism is being taught as the only thing that's happening in the country and the only thing that defines America.
And it's something that is divisive. Teaching about racism is totally different than teaching that whites are inherently racist and that there almost can be no sort of unity between the races. 'Cause I think most people want that. We want harmony. And obviously we can happily and proudly denounce all forms of racism, and those people should feel condemned and convicted. But to say that there's almost no way to reach harmony between the races because of inherent things just based on skin tone, that's really not helpful for furthering the idea of unity.
Yeah. Well, it's also cultural Marxism. It's just Marxism applied to race. So again, that's an interesting point.
Yeah.
But I think we'll keep on seeing this sort of parental interest in what children are being taught, and hopefully that can move towards reform, and reform in a good way, obviously. Reform can sometimes be used by the Marxists, I feel like, a lot in their rhetoric. But
all about transformation there.
Exactly.
Total transvaluation of norms. But
yeah. So moving on to our third win. This is an article by the Washington Examiner written by Julia Johnson. Shout out Julia. She's one of my friends I interned with this summer, now doing great things. But it's Ivanka Trump partnered and supplied 1 million meals to Ukrainian refugees. So that is, this great thing of charity that she's doing. Obviously, there's a lot going on with Ukraine and Russia right now, and we aren't going to get into the meat of that. But I think it is a win that we're seeing people who are in positions of power and wealth using their capital to help others.
Right. That's what hitting on the free market in the previous win, I think, was the perfect segue into this, because what I think is so much of a win of this is not just that, yes, it's great that Ivanka is being generous and charitable. It's that it's capitalists that are helping situations. And in every crisis we saw this especially during the pandemic, it is capitalists that are helping. It's not this great big
socialized
totalitarian socialist government that came in and helped people. It was individual capitalists who gained their wealth through businesses that were benefiting consumers by creating products, services that benefited other people, and they have accrued the wealth to be able to help people. And we've seen this a lot with Elon Musk and so many other people who wouldn't even consider themselves conservatives at all, would never consider themselves capitalists, even though they have accrued their wealth via a capitalist system.
Yeah.
It's so powerful to see this, and hardly anyone looks at these stories through the lens of, oh wow, that's an individual who gained their wealth through a capitalist society being able to help people, but that's exactly what it is. And these sorts of stories are great for explaining how the free market is an efficient and beneficial and morally ethical way to have your economy operate.
Yeah, and I think that's the perfect example of how faith and freedom kind of work together. Because you have the freedom to make this money and do well and have a business and make profit. But then the faith aspect of it is that we are called to, as Christians, be charitable and help those who are less fortunate than us. So you need kind of both, because capitalism, if it's just by just to make money and there's no moral end of it, that could be something that is not good. Yeah. But I think whenever you're seeing the intersection of faith and freedom, like we here at IFF promote, I think this is the outcome of it, and this is a huge win for conservatives, liberals, should be everyone.
Yeah, should be everyone is right. I like that. That's a great point, Libby.
Yeah, so thank you for tuning in to Liberty Mail. Thanks, Margot, for filling in for Aaron today.
Thanks for having me, Libby.
And again, if you have not signed up for our Michael Knowles keynote speaker, April 7th, 7 p.m. here at Grove City College's campus, head over to faithandfreedom.com. Make sure you subscribe to the podcast, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and on YouTube. Hit the bell. It should be somewhere under Margot over there. But we'll see you here next time for another episode of Liberty Mail.
For more information on this podcast or other programs, please visit faithandfreedom.com.